This episode of the Lunduk Show is brought to you by Pogo Linux. Check this out. I love doing this. If you go over to pogolinux.com, click on servers at the top of the page. Follow along with me here because this is crazy. This is crazy. Scroll down here. First server on the top of the page is the ARM R150-T62. It's a 1U rack unit. What I wanted to draw your attention to here was this. Maximum memory over 8 terabytes. Oh my lord, it's got 4. I love that so much. I want 8 terabytes of RAM. Why don't I have 8 terabytes of RAM? Oh my lord, this thing starts at $5,800. It's got 2 KVM Thunder X, which is a great name for a processor, 48 core ARM processors. So 2 times 48. That is 1,000,000 cores. That's if my math is correct. And 16 DDR slots capable of handling over 8 terabytes of RAM. Oh my lordy pants. It's got so much. It's got 3 40 gigabit Ethernet ports and 4 10 gigabit Ethernet ports, along with 4 hot swappable drive bays. Oh my heavens. That's over at pogolinux.com. And of course, System76. Oh, check this mother out. If you go over to system76.com right now, I love hardware. I don't know a lot about hardware. I really don't. Like, not compared to hardware guys. I'm more of a software guy, but man, do I love drooling over good hardware. If you go over there right now and you check out their laptops, they got the Oryx Pro, and the reason I'm highlighting it right now is because it's on sale. It's $50 off right now, starting at $14.99. It's beautiful. It's got an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 10 GPU. You can get it with a 15 or 17-inch display. It can handle up to 64 gigs of RAM. No joke. Your laptop needs a GTX 10 GPU and 64 gigs of RAM. That's just an important thing in life. And it's $50 off right now over at system76.com. Awesome. This is today's hardware is all about having tons of RAM. And of course, viewers like you, viewers like these lovely people. All right. Today, I'm telling stories. That's it. That's it, and that's all. That's all I'm doing today. I'm just literally going to be telling stories, specifically stories from Microsoft. I worked at Microsoft for about 5 years, and I was there from the late 80s. I believe it was 98 that I joined in, and I was there through about 2003. And so I was there for about 5 years, and I had a really, really crazy time there. I got to meet a lot of weird and crazy people and do some funky stuff. And I've told a few of these stories over the years, and people wanted to hear some more of it. And so I thought, well, why not just do one video where I give you just a whole bunch of some of my favorite stories from my time at Microsoft. So if you want an inside view of what it was like at Microsoft at the turn of the century, which is weird to say, but technically it was the turn of the century, let's rock and roll with it. I'm releasing this on November 1st. Originally I was going to do this on October 31st and make it a Halloween, like Microsoft Stories of Horror. And then I realized there's a few horror stories in here. Some of them are just weird though. And so I'm just like, you know what? Day after Halloween, we're all, trying to recuperate from a sugar hangover. Let's just talk about the weirdness of what it was like to be at Microsoft. What is this? 19 some odd years ago? And a little bit less after that. Anyway, let's tell some of these stories. I'm going to go through these mostly chronologically, starting in my very first days at Microsoft. So I joined the company when I was 19 years old. I joined Microsoft really right out of school. So my first job in tech, and just to go back a little bit, was working at Hewlett-Packard. I got a job at Hewlett-Packard before I graduated high school, right beforehand. And I started literally the day I graduated high school. I started working at Hewlett-Packard. I was working on old Unix workstations. So I was like coming in and working on these old Apollo and HPUX workstations and that sort of thing. And it was interesting. It was fun, but I realized it wasn't quite what I wanted to do. So I quit that job after, I can't remember how long. And I went back to school. I decided I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to go to college for computer science and work towards a degree in computer science. I'm going to be a programmer. After about a year of that, I kind of ran out of money to be in school, and I kind of also ran out of steam. Like it wasn't gelling well with me. So I thought, what else could I do? And as luck would have it, they had at the college campus I was at, they had like one of those recruiter fairs, and Microsoft was there. I got a job at Microsoft as a software tester. I'm like, well, that gets my foot in the door. So I took it. So I got a job as a software tester. I was 19 years old, and I go and join Microsoft, and it was an overwhelming experience. I was this huge company. I was working on the main campus of Microsoft in Redmond, Washington. I can't remember which building I was in. I think it was building 25 or 50. Or I moved between buildings a couple of times. And I get there, and the first thing that you do, the first day on the job, and I was a contractor. I wasn't a full-time employee. That's an important part of the first story I want to tell, is that I had to set up my security badge, get my picture taken, and get my email alias set up so I could access email and through Outlook and all the corporate stuff. So they set up my email alias. Well, now at Microsoft, contractors have an A dash in front of their name, which meant that you were contracting to Microsoft through an agency. So I was A dash and then my name. Now my name wasn't the same back then. My last name was a little different. My last name was Lundhale. And it was that way because that's what my parents got remarried, and I got a hyphenated name in high school, and that's what it was. So I go and join Microsoft, and they made my email alias A-BLHALE. That was my email address. However, there was a bug in all of Microsoft Office. If you typed my email alias, it instantly, without letting you choose not to, auto-corrected it to blowhole. This clearly made everyone I worked with very amused. It got fixed like 8 months later in a patch, in an internal patch. They finally fixed it. But I was stuck. At that point, I was Blowhole. That was my nickname. I was a 19-year-old kid with no real experience to speak of in this mega huge company surrounded by people who had been in the business for 10 plus years. I was friggin' Blowhole. So when people went to send an email to me, literally they'd type my email alias and it would instantly change to Blowhole. Blowhole. That was awful. I didn't shake that for 2 years. By the point that I was around for about 2 years, enough people had cycled through that it had died out. Like people weren't around for that long. But oh my gosh, that was a problem. Now, I was 19, and this was Microsoft. And in Microsoft back in the late 90s, alcohol flowed fast and free. Every Friday they had beer Fridays in the group I was in. And I'm live streaming this right now, and the chat room is already saying, let's bring Blowhole back. Like, no. We're done with that. That was 20 some years ago. We're done with that. So I was 19. I was under the legal drinking age. I couldn't drink. Beer Fridays every day. I was the only person under 21 in the entire group. Everyone else was drinking. Everyone. And so we'd go down to the cafeteria and I'd grab a Coke, because at Microsoft, all the soda and whatnot you can drink is free, right? So I just grab a Coke and hang out while everyone else is literally getting plastered. And man, Not everybody, but there was a pretty big contingency within the group that used to say the phrase, let's get blowhole drunk. They tried really hard to get this 19-year-old drunk, which looking back on it, I thought it was funny at the time, right? It's no big deal. But looking back on it, man, yeah. That they were in some legal trouble. They were trying to get a minor drunk inside their corporation. They probably should not have done that. I digress. I just think the phrase "get blowhole drunk" is a weird one that's worth noting. You can see why some of these stories are not horror stories. It's simply worth noting and very, very bizarre. It was a very it was a very, very weird time. I was specifically working on Wallet. This was the first piece of software I worked on at a company. And if you don't know what Wallet is, Microsoft Wallet was an ActiveX control. Hey, remember those? That shipped as part of Internet Explorer in starting in Windows ME. No, 98. Starting with Windows 98 and then Windows 2000. And I was working on Microsoft Wallet. And all it was an ActiveX control that securely, notice that's in air quotes, stored your credit card information. Like, all right, cool, right? It was sort of Microsoft's way to be big in e-commerce, like so that every website that did e-commerce would have this little wallet ActiveX control. And when you clicked it, it would autofill whatever form was on there with all of your credit card information. It was a really stupid thing. I thought it was dumb. Everyone who worked on it thought it was dumb. At least that's how I recall it. So Wallet. The cool part about all that is I was working on this little stupid ActiveX control. It was really stupid. And I was kind of the primary software tester on it because it wasn't a big team. It was part of a big team, but it was like this little mini team inside of a big team. I got to work on some really weird platforms with it though. So my job was to make sure that it worked properly on alpha processors running on NT5, which is what Windows 2000 came to be before it was known as Windows 2000, back when it was just called Windows NT 5.0, before they renamed it. And I got to put it on old DEC Alpha machines, and that was so cool for me. I mean, as a nerd, I got to play around with DEC Alphas. I mean, I had to do it with NT5, but still, it was a DEC Alpha, and that was cool. That particular team I was on, I made a very good friend at that job. That very first job, I made a lifelong buddy, and he was the other tester in the group, and there was just two testers really, and it was with two of us in the group, and we spent about a week. I want to say it was about a week putting together hardware that we scrounged together throughout the company. Like we found in labs and whatnot, different network cards and sound cards and whatnot, until we built the perfect machine to run BOS. No joke. We spent like a week, probably not the best use of corporate time, but I was 19-year-old nerd and my job was so super easy. It was to test Wallet friggin' out, and it was testing the ActiveX control that had like 2 features on it. And so I had a lot of free time to like kind of do other projects. And we spent like a week getting BOS up and running inside our office. Which was fun. So I got to play around with a lot of alternative operating systems back then, which was really, really cool. While I was there at Wallet, again, I was I 20 yet? I want to say I was still 19 years old. They have this thing. They have this thing in Microsoft that at least they did back then that they call, they wouldn't have it anymore, called the Bill G reviews. And so it was a regular thing that happened, once a year, etc., where you and your group, your division, go in front of Bill Gates and justify your existence. Basically, you give Bill Gates a chance to see what you're working on, to see what sort of progress you've made, to hear about the stats and the bug counts and the new features and the usability and everything else. And Bill Gates gets to tell you what he thinks because he was Bill Gates. He ran the company. And the group I was in had to do a Bill G review for all of a bunch of commerce server stuff, old IIS stuff back at Microsoft. And Wallet was a part of that team. My boss at the time thought it would be hilarious to bring 19-year-old Blowhole to the Bill G review. Kind of give me it was like, come along, Blowhole, have some fun. And so I had no speaking part in this. There was many like engineers and program managers and the general manager of the department all went, and they had like slide decks and they had information to review. I had not been there that long. I had the least important job in the entire division. It was literally, my job was to click on Microsoft Wallet to make sure it did a thing on different processors. That was my whole job. It was really dumb. A monkey could have done my job. In fact, a monkey probably would have done my job better. Anyway, so we go to this review. It was across campus. We all go over, we catch a shuttle. Microsoft has Microsoft shuttles that pick you up. You go down to the lobby and you say, I need a shuttle to building 4 or whatever. And I think this was actually in building 4. So we go down there and we say, hey, we need a shuttle building 4. And my job was literally to carry a few things. I had some equipment that we were carrying over that they were using as part of the presentation. It was some server stuff and whatnot, just mostly as a visual aid. That was my whole job in this. We get over there and we set up. Bill's not in the room yet. We set everything up in this board kind of meeting room. In comes Bill and several other people that I did not recognize. The room was full. So this big, long boardroom meeting table that fit, it was just really long. It just was weird for me. That fit probably 15 or 20 people all the way around it. It was really long. And then there was a bunch of people standing around the edges. And then there was me. I had no value there. Like, I was literally there because my boss thought it was funny to bring Blowhole. I was standing near the door because I'm just going to stand in the back and watch this, right? Because I was 19-year-old. I was a 19-year-old nerdy kid. And I'm standing in the back, and the presentation that they were giving to Bill Gates as part of their Bill G review to justify their existence, to make sure that their division has funding from Bill going forward, went bad. Part of the demo didn't work. Bill wasn't happy with the stats. Bill wasn't happy with the size of the team. Bill wasn't happy with how long it was taking to get to market. Bill was not happy. Bill pivots just a little bit, looks me square in the eyes, and begins to yell at me about what was happening. Not me personally, just like yelling about, he didn't like all the things I just said. He just yelled about how much he was unhappy with all of it and it needs to get fixed. But the whole goddamn time, he's looking straight at me. He has no idea who I am. He might not even know who I am nowadays. He definitely had no idea who my name was. There was no introduction. There was no, this is Brian. This is Blowhole. Look over there. No one was going to make that joke to Bill Gates. So I was just standing in the back of the door, sweating profusely. My armpits were drenched. I was freaking out. I was positive that I'd just gotten my big break in software and I was going to get fired by Bill Gates. And nowadays I would have thought, well, this will make a great story. If nothing else, right? But back then I was terrified, and I was just utterly terrified. And my boss was sitting on the other side of the room, and he kind of looks over at me, and he just starts sweating. And we left the room, but I got just absolutely ripped apart by Bill Gates, and he had no idea who I was. I don't think he cared who I was. I don't think he knows who I am nowadays. But man, was he pissed off at me. So that was the time I got chewed out by Bill Gates, and he didn't even know who I was. I had another run-in with Bill, sorta. Not long after this, maybe a month or two later, my girlfriend comes out to visit me on campus. Now my wife. And she comes out to visit me. and we go out to lunch. And we go out to a nice lunch, and then we start taking a walk around Microsoft main campus. And this was in, this was in 98, right? 98 or 99? 98. We're walking around main campus. And if you don't know what Microsoft main campus looks like, it's very big. And there are some really pretty like parks, not huge, but like little park-like areas with some windy trails leading between some of the buildings. There's a few fountains and whatnot, like a couple of ponds. And so we're walking around like, let's check it out. Because I hadn't really checked out a lot of it, right? So we're in the oldest part of the Microsoft campus. We are in the original, not the original buildings, but the like the oldest buildings of the main campus that were still around. And we're taking this walk around, and we're really having a good time, right? We're having a good day, laughing and joking. It was time to go. She needed to get back to work, and I needed to get back to work. I'd already been on lunch for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. It was a long lunch. So I was heading back, like, let's take a shortcut through this building right here. I didn't even realize what building it was. I think it was building 4. I'm not really sure. We cut through the building because we were just going to go through it, grab a shuttle back to my building, and then, she could drive off to her job. So we're cutting through this building. And we literally got lost. So we come in through the back of the building because we're in this park area, coming through the back, and then there was like a stairwell and a hallway and then another hallway, and we turned and we got all turned around and lost. So then we went down this third hallway, and we hadn't seen anybody. Like, it was totally dead quiet. Not one human being, which was weird. Normally there's just people milling about. It's an office building. And so we're walking along, and we see someone down at the edge standing next to a door, like a guy, like not in any special outfit or anything, just a guy, standing within like a black polo shirt or something, like looked like he could have been a security guard, but was really just kind of dressed casual. We walked past him, and he stopped up. He's like, "Excuse me, you need to stop right there." And I was like, and me and my girlfriend were like, "Whoa, that was a little bit intense." And like this was a more intense greeting than we were expecting, just walking past a random guy. So we turn and look, and the inside that room, there's a window facing out of it. There's Bill Gates, video camera set up on him, and a bunch of people in shirt and ties. That was the Bill Gates deposition. Remember when the antitrust trial was going on? Bill Gates got deposed over the course of a couple of days. That was that deposition. I was there, and multiple people in the room kind of turned and looked up at the window because there was something going on there, and they kind of looked at us like, "Who are these bastards?" And then they turned and looked back, and then they just ignored us. And then we explained that we really didn't know where we were at, and I'm just going to keep walking. And he's like, yes, go that way now. So I kind of felt like maybe I was going to get fired again. Man, my first year at Microsoft was not an easy one in a lot of ways. Every interaction I had that came even close to Bill Gates, I just assumed I was going to get fired. So I actually got to watch in person a few seconds of the infamous Bill Gates antitrust monopoly trial deposition that he gave. That was just weird. I mean, I'm not part of that at all, but it's kind of cool that I got to have that weird intersection where I just bump into this big historic tech industry moment, and no one cares that I was even there. I was just there for a second and then gone. That was fun. Oh, DRM. DRM is the worst thing in the world, right? I was on the team that developed the very first full-fledged Microsoft DRM implementation in Microsoft. This was around 99. And it happened as part of a reorganization. I got put onto this team along with a couple other people. And my job was to work with a couple other testers to find ways to break Microsoft's DRM implementation. You know how current Intel chips have technology in them that makes it easier to implement certain kinds of DRM. I was on the team that helped work with Intel to define what that DRM needs were from Microsoft. So we would kind of influence Intel to put those features in the chip. So yeah, it's my fault. I didn't. So my job was to break it though. Me and a few other testers, we created, scripts and little tools. This was really my first opportunity to do any development of any kind, and it was very, very little. Most of the other testers got to do more, to break through it and to find ways to work around Microsoft's DRM implementation, which at the time was terrible and super easy to work around, just like instantly easy. I mean, DRM is still easy to work around. There's never been a foolproof DRM implementation made, but it was so easy to work around back then. It was ridiculous. So V 1.0 of Microsoft's DRM implementation, I was on that team. Some more interesting stories, though, than the fact, because I wasn't really involved in the design of it. I didn't like that I was on it. And very quickly thereafter, I left to go do other stuff because I didn't like being on a DRM team. I mean, even back then, I was a little bit of a freedom-thumping hippie. So I just didn't like working on the DRM stuff. But there was something that happened there that was very entertaining, even at the time. You hear a lot about discrimination, gender discrimination, ethnicity discrimination, etc., age discrimination within the tech industry. When I was working on DRM at Microsoft, there were 3 white people. 3 of them. 3 white boys. There's no white ladies, I don't think. Everyone else was either from India or China or Japan. I want to say there was maybe 1 or 2 African Americans, but it was mostly India and Japan that made up the majority of the individuals working on that team. So there was three honkies, 3 white boys. Everyone on that team, and I mean everyone, had their own office. Every single person. And it wasn't a tiny team. It was pretty significant. With the exception of the white boys. They took the 3 white boys. This is not a joke. This is not meant to start any sort of debate over racial discrimination. It's just a really weird story. They took the 3 white boys and they put us in a room. The smallest office I have ever seen. You know when you have a movie where they send someone to the basement and you open the door to their new office and the door bonks immediately against the desk because there's not quite enough room to walk around the door and behind the desk because it's so small? That's the kind of office we had. And there was 3 of us. In fact, after they put us in that room, they began taking away equipment and tables. I had, before I finally left the team, I kid you not, a table that was about as wide as my shoulders, so about like this, and not deep at all, just deep enough to put a monitor. This was back during the days of CRT monitors, so it had to be a little bit deep to fit a 14-inch CRT. And I was doing testing under multiple architectures, so I didn't have any leg space. So underneath my desk was 3 towers, and then a 4th tower turned on its side and sat on top of it underneath that, and then another tower on the desk that the monitor sat on top of. So I had all my machines with different processors and various different iterations of Pentium processors, and I think there was an Athlon box. Remember the old AMD 586 Athlons? I had to test on one of those, and some DEC Alphas and whatnot, and and so that was my little. I kind of squeezed myself in there and do my work on that, and there was 3 of us, right? In this tiny, tiny little room. And it was kind of hilarious. I mean, because it was so obvious. In order for me to leave the room, I had to announce it because both of my office mates had to stand up one at a time and exit the room in order for me to walk out of the room. Not a joke. Both people had to do that. And we decided to put ourselves in age order. The guy near the door was the oldest, so he gets to come and go as he pleases because he's an old guy. And then the other guy was a little bit older than me, just by like a year or two. So he got the next spot. And then me, I got the little one because I was the little kid. I was blowhole, and I get the little itty bitty. So, it happens. You have a little too much white privilege, you get stuck in a room with the two other white honkies. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. It was a weird thing. We made tons of fun of it at the time. We used to make comments constantly about sticking the white boys in the room. At one point, they were interviewing for a developer in test position, a software developer engineer in test, SDET, position to join the team. And the guy that came in and interviewed for it was a white guy, right? And, and we see him and we just immediately start laughing and we're like, dude. And we went to our boss, who was an Indian guy, a very nice guy, no problem. So we go to him and we're like, man, I don't think we can hire him. And he looks at us and it's like, why not? And he's like, there's no more space in the white people room. Fun times. After I was working on that, I went over to work on Windows Media Player, but not Windows Media Player for Windows. I worked on Windows Media Player for other platforms, including Solaris, Windows CE and Pocket PC, and then Mac OS. And this was back during Mac OS Classics days. So I was literally testing on Mac OS 6 and 7 and early iterations of Mac OS 8. And this is what I was doing. And I was doing some development and some testing and whatnot. And I developed the installers on the Mac side for it, and then mostly just did testing after that. But this was called the Windows Media Player XPlat team, the cross-platform Windows Media Player team. And it was going really well, right? I was doing a good job. I felt like I was finally really getting into my stride working in the software industry. Like, I understood how things worked. I was getting more efficient. I was getting better at stuff. Honestly, I was getting better at coding because, my skills were pretty rough at that point, but I was getting better at it and I was able to do more stuff. And my manager at the time was like, I was still a contractor. I was still that A-. I was still blowhole. So my manager at the time was like, you should really join Microsoft as a full-timer. They called them blue badges because if you had a badge that was blue, that meant that you were a full-time official Microsoft employee. And I wasn't. I was an orange guy. I had an orange badge. And so I'm there, and they like, you should really interview for that. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'd never really worked other places at this point. I mean, this was my experience in the tech world, and I'm like, I'm being offered a potentially big promotion. Let's go for it. And so I interviewed. It was a day-long interview process. A whole day. It started in the morning and went until like 6 p.m. at night. I didn't get the job. I stayed working there as a contractor, but I didn't get the full-time job. And here's why. Turns out I did a great job on my job. I did fantastically on the interview, except there was one question. They asked me what sort of stuff I want to work on. And I'm like, well, you know what? I thought I want to tell them I like working on what I'm working on right now because that's what they want to hire me for. Like, I like working on Windows Media Player across a bunch of different platforms. And they're like, really? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, it's really interesting. And they're like, hey, should this be, what's interesting about working on all these different platforms? I'm like, well, I like being able to work on Solaris. I like being able to work on classic Mac OS. And I find that really interesting. It gives me a lot of variety and engaging. I came up with some big answer about it. I thought it was pretty good. Turns out I was supposed to say, and I was told this specifically, like they had an answer they wanted me to say. I was supposed to say, I don't mind working on these other platforms, but I sure wish I could work on Windows because it's a better platform than Solaris or Mac OS. So they didn't hire me. So I kept working on Windows Media Player for Mac OS for quite a while. It was actually kind of weird. Interestingly, at Microsoft was my first experience with Red Hat Linux. So this was, I'd had an experience with SUSE Linux prior to that. But with Red Hat Linux, I got to set up a Red Hat Linux server to put Windows Media files on, to stream them out to share them out to Windows Media clients running on Mac OS and Solaris for playback. We actually had to test against using a Red Hat server, which was kind of cool. So I had a Red Hat server under my desk, and then later on in the lab. So that was my first Red Hat experience. Was while I was at Microsoft working on Windows Media Player for Solaris and Mac, which was a very weird time. I've told this story before. I'm going to tell a shortened version of it again because for the sake of completeness, I want to have as many of these stories in this video as possible. When I was on that team, the Windows Media Player team, was right about the time that Windows 2000 was getting ready to launch. And when that was happening, Microsoft threw a big party, really big party. So I go to this party. And actually, it was kind of neat. They converted like this 3-story garage into this triple-decker party factory. And it was awesome. They had this like inflatable laser tag arena and beer gardens and food stuff. And there was no cars in it, obviously. And it was just kind of neat, right? So they had the stage set up on the main floor of it. And they had people like, product leaders from the Windows Media team getting up and going, "We did such a great job. Great job shipping the most advanced computer operating system on the planet." It was, and everyone's like, "Yay, we're the best." And it was going on like that for a while. And so then, we find out that Steve Ballmer was going to take the stage along with, I want to say it was Brian Valentine, who was kind of one of the heads in the Windows group for a long time. So I thought this would be kind of interesting. I've never met Steve Ballmer before. I'd been yelled at by Bill Gates, and I'd crashed a Bill Gates deposition, but I'd never met Steve Ballmer. So me and one of the developers who worked on Windows Media Player for Solaris, we're two of the cross-platform buddies, the guys who don't really run Windows. We kind of all banded together. So we go up to the stage, and we have our plate full of little appetizers, little pigs in a blankets and stuff like that, little mini pizza bagel things, and we got our drinks with us, and we're standing up front, and then Steve Ballmer comes up on stage and with a couple other guys, and they start telling everyone what a great job we did. We're changing the industry. We're setting the future for Microsoft. We've really, really delivered something special, blah, 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 blah. And it was getting pretty boring. But then Steve Ballmer goes on an anti-Linux rant. And this was when Windows 2000 shipped. So this was kind of the height of Steve Ballmer's Linux is cancer, that time frame, right? That was when this was going on. So I'm there, a Linux-loving, Mac-using, Solaris-using guy sitting right with a Linux-loving and Solaris-developing guy, and we're in the front row, and we kind of look at each other like, "Here it goes again," but we're still watching because he's a bigwig, right? It's kind of like if someone you disagree with but is a big mega star is right in front of you on stage, you still kind of just watch because it's cool that you get to be there for that moment, right? So we're sitting there, and he starts going on a rant. And I'm going to say this as straight as I can. I recognize there is at least one factual error in what he says. However, it is me repeating what he says. He says, "I hate Linux," and everyone's like, "Yeah!" in the audience, and me and the guy next to me are just kind of like, "I hate that expletive Norwegian. Yay!" Now here's the thing. He was referring to Linus Torvalds, who is not Norwegian. He referred to him as a Norwegian. I've told this story a couple of times now, and people are like, Brian, he's Finnish. He's not Norwegian. I know this. I know Linus is not Norwegian. However, he says that so many, he said it. And so it's like a thing now in my head. I find it humorous every time I call Linus Norwegian, because that's what Steve Ballmer said while he was ranting and raving on the stage, literally like a foot in front of me. So anyway, that's all done. And we walk away because, the stage clears and the crowd clears out. And I realize my glasses are all covered with spittle, and his words as well. And we realized that our mouths were open the entire time, which means I'm covered at that point, including my glasses and in my mouth with Steve Ballmer spit. I've told this story a few times. I don't need to stare out that many more, but I wanted to include it here because this is a video about Microsoft stories. So there you have it. Microsoft, at Microsoft party, Steve Ballmer spit in my mouth. He didn't know who I was. I'm pretty sure he doesn't really care who I was, or even care who I am now. He's worth like $1 bajillion and has sport teams. But he spit in my mouth once. It was weird. So yeah, it's gross. It's wicked gross. It remains gross to this day. But what are you gonna do, right? The last team I was on at Microsoft, I was on for a couple of years, was on the Microsoft Office team, specifically on the Office for Mac team, which was sort of the redheaded stepchild of Office. We had our own floor of a building. We were kind of separated from the actual Microsoft Office development. And when I joined the team was before Mac OS X shipped, I believe. If I'm remembering all this right, this was a long time ago. And but it was when we were developing the first version of Microsoft Office that would run natively on Mac OS X. It's really very bizarre. It was a very, very bizarre time. I came on as an SDET. I was a software developer in test. So I was part of the testing organization. I did a lot of automation stuff. I worked on scriptability, VBA for Microsoft Word and Excel and things like that, which means I know way more about Excel and Word and its scriptability than I ever want to know in my entire life. So anyway, I'm working there for a few years, and it wasn't a great experience. It truly wasn't. I mean, I learned a lot. I learned a lot through that experience, but it wasn't fantastic. But I did come away with, a couple of good friends and learning a few things. One of the experiences I had, this was back when really no huge applications had been ported from macOS Classic, macOS 8 and 9, etc., to macOS 10. And they created this API set that they called Carbon, which was a slimmed down version of the existing Macintosh Toolbox API to run on macOS 10. So clearly, Microsoft Office was not going to be rewritten from scratch. It was going to be ported using this slimmed down Carbon API. There was so many problems in those days. Like, the API that Apple created was barely functional. It was an absolute train wreck. It was a disaster. And even though it was so bad to start with, but to make matters worse, Microsoft Office was a huge, kludgy, awful code base that had been around forever, right? I mean, Office for Mac had existed for 2 decades at that point, and it was a huge, kludgy code base. So its code managed to expose every single friggin' bug that Apple had in their Carbon API. So we had these weekly meetings, often more, where some of the engineers from Microsoft would be on a conference call with some of the engineers from Apple to work through the issues. Because Apple really wanted Microsoft Office on Mac OS X at the time, because they were trying to find a way to justify Mac OS X. People don't maybe realize it if they're Mac OS X users nowadays, but back then, most Mac users were looking at Mac OS X and saying, why would I use this? There's no software available. And so Apple even created what they called the classic environment. So you could just basically run Mac OS in a window inside Mac OS X. So you could keep running all the applications you'd run. Because, man, it was just, OS X was a disaster back then. I'd argue it still is, but that's an argument for a different day. Anyway, I didn't really have much involvement with any of that until one day. In my automation work, I uncovered a bug. It was just one little bug, right? It was one bug in Carbon. And we needed it fixed for some of the VBA functionality. The engineer that was responsible for that, because remember, I was just a tester. I was just the guy making scripts to test it and to try it out and whatnot. And but that engineer was out that day, sick or something. I don't even remember. So they had me come in. They're like, Brian, can you come in this conference call and explain the issue over the phone? Because the engineers at Apple weren't quite understanding from the emails we sent. I'm like, oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, I came in. So I came in and I sat down. And they had a whole bunch of other issues before they got into the one I was dealing with, which wasn't even an important thing. Honestly, I don't even remember the details of it at this point. It was so long ago and so trivial. And things went badly long before it got to me. It got heated. There was engineers on the other side of the phone just screaming at the Microsoft guys. And the Microsoft guys were red in the face. The engineers were pissed at each other. And then it got to me. They're like, all right, what's this issue? What's this next one we're talking about? And I was like, oh yeah. And then I explained it. It was a very short explanation. And then I was about to say something like, and I can send you a script that shows it. And then someone jumps in, just lets me have it. Like, this doesn't make any sense. You're using it wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just lets me have it. And I was like stunned. I was like someone had just come up to me and been like, fish slapped me right in the middle of the face. And I just didn't even know what was happening anymore. So I left that meeting. I find out later that was Avi Tevenian. One of the guys really responsible for Next Step and OpenStep, the mock microkernel, a lot of the Cocoa stuff, and the head of engineering over at Apple for the whole Mac OS X creation time. So without knowing it, and without him knowing at all who I was, Avi Tevenian really let me have it. That was a weird one too. I like the fact that I get yelled at and spit on by legendary technology executives, and they have no idea who I even am. It's just kind of an ongoing thing in my life. It was very, very strange. But that whole thing was bizarre. It was very, very bizarre. So while I was in the Macintosh business unit, we had this was right when you remember those blue and white G3 Macs that came out, the ones that just kind of look like big plastic blue and white things with these big plastic handles on the side that could pull them out, and they were pretty cool machines. They had G3 PowerPC processors in them back way before the Intel switch over at Apple. We had 100 of them, maybe something like that, in our lab, just lined up in a row that ran nothing but automated tests on every nightly build of Microsoft Office running on OS X. And it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. But here's the thing. Those automated tests really only took a couple of hours, which means we had 100-ish. I mean, just lab bank after lab bank filled. It was just a hallway of nonstop, never-ending seeming G3 blue and white things, and a bunch of older Macs as well. So what do you do with that? Well, the lab guys decided to write scripts. So after the automation suites run, it relaunches SETI at home. And for a time, the number one or number two, I believe, SETI at home group was that lab right there, which was kind of interesting. And for those of you who don't know SETI at home, it was a distributed computing thing. It still is, I suppose, that people talked about a lot more back then, where you get little chunks of data to compute on it and send it back up to the servers to try and look for, information coming down from the radio telescopes, looking for extraterrestrial life. And so we were using all of that electricity and G3 power to try and find extraterrestrial life. We didn't succeed. Anyway, I don't work at Microsoft anymore. I haven't worked at Microsoft in, 15 years or so, like that. And those were really crazy days. I did have a lot of fun there. I would never. I hate saying I'd never go back and work there again, but I don't think I would. It's most of the experiences I had were not absolutely fantastic. It was weird. I mean, how many times can you get yelled at by an executive or spit on by an executive or something before you're like, man, maybe I'm in the wrong job? But it was really weird. One thing that was nice, one thing that was truly nice about working at Microsoft, the cafeterias. In case you've never had the opportunity, and I don't know if it's still this way, but over a decade ago, the cafeterias at Microsoft, some of them were actually pretty good. Yeah, like nice. I remember one time I went to the cafeteria and I got a fresh buffalo meat burger with pepper jack cheese on it, on this like fancy ciabatta roll with like house cut fries, and it was fantastic, and it was like $5 or whatever. It was $4. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. The burgers might have been the best part about working at Microsoft. It seems like that might have been either that or the Ballmer spit, one of the two.